Welcome to yet another episode of The Speaking Tree. In this episode, we are going to listen to what Saint Faustina has talked about the trials sent by God to a soul which is particularly loved by Him. And also, she talked about the agony of the soul and also the temptations and the darkness created by Satan. So, without much waiting, let's listen. What is the degree of obedience means? Prompt and complete fulfillment. That means the obedience of the will when the will persuades the intellect to submit to the advice of the superior. To facilitate obedience, Saint Ignatius suggests moreover three means. Always to see God in our superior, whoever he might be, to justify in itself the order or advice of the superior, to accept each order as an order from God without examining it or reflecting on it. General means are humility. Nothing is difficult for the humble. O my Lord, inflame my heart with love for you, that my spirit may not grow weary amidst the storms, the sufferings, and the trials. You see how weak I am. Love can do all. In the beginning, God lets Himself be known as holiness, justice, goodness, that is to say, mercy. The soul does not come to know this all at once, but piecemeal, in flashes, that is to say, when God draws near. And this does not last for long because the soul could not bear such light. During prayer, the soul experiences flashes of this light, which makes it impossible to pray as before. Try as it may to force itself to pray as it did before, all is in vain. It becomes completely impossible for it to continue to pray as it did before it received this light. This light which has touched the soul is alive within it, and nothing can either quench or diminish it. This flash of the knowledge of God draws the soul and enkindles its love for Him. But this same flash at the same time allows the soul to know itself as it is. The soul sees its whole interior in a superior light, and it rises up alarmed and terrified. Still, it does not remain under the effects of terror, but it begins to purify itself, to humble and abase itself before the Lord. These lights become stronger and more frequent. The more the soul is crystallized, the more these lights penetrate it. However, if the soul is responded faithfully and courageously to these first graces, God fills it with His consolations and gives Himself to it in a perceptible manner. At certain moments, the soul, as it were, enters into intimacy with God and greatly rejoices in this. It believes that it has already reached the degree of perfection destined for it, because its defects and faults are asleep within it, and this makes it think that they no longer exist. Nothing seems difficult for it. It is ready for everything. It begins to plunge itself into God and taste the divine delights. It is carried along by grace and does not take account of the fact that the time of trial and testing may come. And in fact, this state does not last long. Other moments will soon come. I should add here, however, that the soul will respond more faithfully to divine grace if it has a well-informed confessor to whom it can confide everything. The soul's love for God is still not such as God would have it. The soul suddenly loses the tangible perception of God's presence. Various defects and imperfections rise up within it, and it must fight them furiously. All her faults lift up their heads, but the soul's vigilance is great. The former awareness of the presence of God gives place to coldness and spiritual dryness. The soul has no taste for spiritual exercises. It cannot pray, either in the old way or in the manner in which it had just begun to pray. It struggles this way and that, but can find no satisfaction. God has hidden himself from it, and it can find no consolation in creatures, nor can any of these creatures find a way of consoling it. The soul craves passionately for God, but sees its own misery. It begins to sense God's justice. It seems to it that it has lost all the gifts that God had given it. Its mind is dimmed, and darkness fills it. Unspeakable torment begins. The soul tries to explain its state to the confessor, but it is not understood and is assailed by an even greater unrest. Satan begins his work. Faith staggers under the impact. The struggle is fierce. The soul tries hard to cling to God by an act of will. With God's permission, Satan goes even further. Hope and love are put to test. These temptations are terrible. God supports the soul in secret, so to speak. The soul is not aware of this, but otherwise it would be impossible to stand firm. And God knows very well how much He can allow to befall His soul. The soul is tempted to unbelief in respect to revealed truths and to insincerity towards the confessor. Satan says to it, "Look, no one understands you. Why speak about all this?" Words that terrify it sound in its ears, and it seems to the soul that it is uttering these against God. It sees what it does not want to see. It hears what it does not want to hear. And it is a terrible thing at times like these not to have an experienced confessor. The soul carries the whole burden alone. However, one should make very effort to find, if it is all possible, a well-informed confessor, for the soul can collapse under the burden and come to the very edge of the precipice. All these trials are heavy and difficult. God does not send them to a soul which has not already been admitted to a deeper intimacy with Him, and which has not yet tasted the divine delights. Besides, in this, God has His own plans, which for us are impenetrable. God often prepares His soul in this way for His future designs and great works. He wants to try it as pure gold is tried. But this is not yet the end of the testing. There is still the trial of trials, the complete abandonment of the soul by God. What do you mean by this complete abandonment of the soul? When the soul comes out victorious from the preceding trials, even though it may stumble here and there, it fights on valiantly, humbly calling upon God, "Save me, I am perishing." And it is still able to fight on. At this moment, however, the soul is engulfed in a horrible night. It sees within itself only sin. It feels terrible. It sees itself completely abandoned by God. It feels itself to be the object of His hatred. It is but one step away from despair. The soul does its best to defend itself. It tries to stir up its confidence, but prayer is an even greater torment for it, as this prayer seems to arouse God to an even greater anger. The soul finds itself poised on the summit of a lofty mountain on the very brink of a precipice. The soul is drawn to God but feels repulsed. All other sufferings and tortures in the world are as nothing compared with the sensation into which it has been plunged, namely that of being rejected by God. No one can bring it any relief. It finds itself completely alone. There is no one to defend it. It raises its eyes to heaven, but is convinced that this is not for her. For her, all is lost. It falls deeper and deeper from darkness to darkness, and it seems to it that it has lost forever the God used to love so dearly. This thought is torture beyond all description. But the soul does not agree to it and tries to lift its gaze toward heaven, but in vain. And this makes the torture even more intense. If God wishes to keep the soul in such darkness, no one will be able to give it light. It experiences rejection by God in a vivid and terrifying manner. From its heart burst forth painful moans, so painful that no priest will comprehend it unless he himself has been through these trials. In the midst of this, the evil spirit adds to the soul's suffering, mocking it. Will you persist in your faithfulness? This is your reward. You are in our power. But Satan has only as much influence over the soul as God allows him. And God knows how much we can bear. What have you gotten out of your mortifications, says Satan, and out of your fidelity to the rule? What use are all these efforts? You have been rejected by God. This word rejected becomes a fire which penetrates every nerve to the marrow of the bone. It pierces right through her entire being. The ordeal reaches its climax. The soul no longer looks for help anywhere. It shrinks into itself and loses sight of everything. It is as though it has accepted the torture of being abandoned. This is a moment for which I have no words. This is the agony of the soul. When, for the first time, this moment was drawing near, I was snatched from it by virtue of holy obedience. The directress of novices, alarmed by my appearance, sent me off to confession, but the confessor did not understand me, and I experienced no relief whatsoever. O Jesus, give us experienced priest. When I told this priest I was undergoing infernal tortures, he answered that he was not worried about my soul, because he saw in it a great grace of God. But I understood nothing of this, and not even the least glimmer of light broke through my soul. Then my physical strength began to fail me, and I could no longer carry out my duties, nor could I any longer hide my sufferings. Although I did not say a word about them, the look of pain on my face betrayed me. The superior told me that the sisters had come to her, saying, when they look at me in the chapel, they are moved to pity, because I look so terrible. Yet despite all efforts, the soul is unable to conceal such suffering. Jesus, You alone know how the soul, engulfed in darkness, mourns in the midst of these torments. And despite all this, thirst for God as burning lips thirst for water. It dies and withers. It dies a death without death. That is to say, it cannot die. All its efforts come to nothing. It is under a powerful hand. Now the soul comes under the power of the just one. An exterior temptation ceases. All that surrounds it becomes silent, like a dying person who loses contact with everything around it. The person's entire soul is in the hand of the just God, the Trinity, rejected for all eternity. This is the culminating moment, and the God alone can test a soul in this way, because He alone knows that the soul can endure.